My name is Marcel Elfers, and I'm a master profiler through written communication. My interest in the JonBenet Ramsey case started back in 2007. And at that time, I contacted the then chief of police, Boulder Police, Mark Beckner, and shared my insights with him. Mr. Beckner at the time was not interested, and my insights were met with significant indifference. I do believe the JonBenet Ramsey case was solved a long, long time ago. And the reason that it never went to court had complete different reasons that most people believe. The most authoritative book on the JonBenet Ramsey case was written by the lead investigator, Steve Thomas. The evidence that he brought forth and the decision of the grand jury to indict were all there, and there's good reasons why to indict, of course, the Ramseys. I created some visuals, so let me share my screen. JonBenet, case JonBenet Ramsey. Like I said, I'm a master profiler through written communication, and I'm also a questioned document examiner. I use handwriting analysis, emotional impact analysis, changes in handwriting that occur based on word selection and how that influenced your emotions. I use statement analysis, where word selection has emotional values, and behavioral trend analysis. Certain people, not certain people, everybody, including myself, behave in certain patterns, and these patterns are really distinct. The JonBenet case has intrigued the world in 1996 and continued to do so, because nobody so far has explained with authority what S.B.T.C stands for, and I do believe I solved that. The interest in the JonBenet Ramsey case remains strong. When you look at YouTube's of today, you see regularly hits of 35,000 to 100,000, and people are just interested in this case. And that is partially because the explanation that the Ramseys supplied, the intruder theory, defies all logic. It really does not make any sense. And I will go into that over the coming weeks. So back in 2007, I read a book by Michel Dresbold, Sex, Lies, and Handwriting. And the JonBenet case was brought up there, and it intrigued me. I saw something in the note that was presented, and I thought, that does not make any sense. So I started looking into it. I read at that time about 8-9 books regarding the case. I analyzed the Ransom note, I analyzed the handwriting, and I came to a significant conclusion based on logic. That was back in 2007 when I contacted the then chief of police, Mark Beckner. Since there was no interest on his part, I just let things be, but I wrote a book, We Are the Same. It's the details that differ, that is behavioral trend analysis, in 2015. And as part of that book, I wrote about the JonBenet Ramsey case and revealed the major elements of the case. Hence on the cover, you see JonBenet Ramsey murder mystery is unraveled. Currently, I'm writing a book that I named called JonBenet, the Final Chapter. I call it the final chapter because I do believe, strongly believe, that the theory I present, as well as the evidence that support that theory, is very strong, and it might put the case to rest. At least I hope so. Looking at the case, the whole note and the whole case can be summarized in these 3 sentences. The key words here are listen, your situation, and the line, it's up to you now, John. S.B.T.C is the logical conclusion of the 2.5-page ransom note. It's interesting that S.B.T.C has no period at the end. And that is a strong suggestion that S.B.T.C was a fabricated acronym, because a frequently used acronym would habitually place the last period there. The lack of period means the author was distracted by a thought and it was not automated. So the ransom note is literally the most crucial piece of evidence in the case. However, that is not where the case actually started. People focus a whole lot on the ransom note because it is hard evidence, but we have more evidence. And that is the 911 call made by Patsy at 5:52 a.m. in the morning. So let's have a quick look at the 911 call. One of the most important things in the statement analysis is that we always talk about that what is important to us, or we always talk about that what is important to us first. I want you to do me a favor and yourself a favor, and I want you to think about 5 people in your life. I'll give you 5 seconds. Now, when you thought about these 5 people, all of them are important to you, at least at this moment in time. That is why you think about them in the first place. But even in the sequence of the first person to the last person in the list, there is a certain sequence of importance with the most important one on top and the least important one on the bottom. That is in generally a truth. And therefore, what we say was apparently important enough for us to mention. I will give you another example. In 2015 or so, I had a presentation in New York, and I received a text message from a friend who said, "How was New York?" Well, I was preparing the preparation. I had not gone yet. So I replied, New York is on whatever date it was. And I'm prepping the presentation right now. And she replied with, "Fun. You'll be on the other side of the US." Now, most people will think, why say the obvious? But the rule is we talk about that what is important to us. Therefore, you should not ask yourself, why say the obvious? Ask yourself, why was this important enough for you to say, to mention? It turned out 2 weeks prior to her texting me, she drove literally from Helena, Montana to North Carolina or South Carolina. So she went across the US herself, and so she related to that distance. So here is the 911 call, a transcript. And since the rule is we talk about what is important to us first, let's look what Patsy talks about. First, she starts with the address, 755 15th Street. Then she says, we have a kidnapping. That in itself is really interesting because A is nondescript. Who or what is kidnapped? Your dog? The parrot? A child? A neighbor? A kidnapping is nondescript. And she says, hurry please, explain to me what's going on, okay? And she said, we have a, so she basically started to repeat sentence 5, we have a kidnapping. She felt probably she was interrupted by explain to me what's going on, and she starts over where she left off with we have a. And that sounds rehearsed, which makes it inauthentic. She continues with there is a note. A note is also nondescript. It doesn't say what the content of the note is. And then she continues with, our daughter is gone. So JonBenet, the daughter, was kidnapped. There is a note. And the priority of the daughter is 5th in line. That is odd in itself. At line 13, she wrote, she said, just found a note. It's still not, she still not say it was a ransom note. And finally, does it say who took her? And Patsy said, what? To answer with a question is buying yourself time to think about how to answer. It's not spontaneous. She said, no, I don't know it's there. There is a ransom note. Finally, line 17, she says it's a ransom note. Even the operator is surprised to hear that it's a ransom note. It says S.B.T.C. victory, please. Now, for a mother who is missing her child based on a kidnapping note, you would expect, my daughter has been kidnapped, help me. But she didn't. It was address, a kidnapping, a note, daughter is gone. Oh, it's a ransom note. That defies logic. That defies behavior that you would expect. So Patsy basically told us the starting point of the investigation. The investigation starts at the address, the home. And that is where JonBenet was murdered and is where the body still is. So the rule, we talk about what is most important to us first, applies. The most important thing to Patsy was the home where it all happened. Then Patsy hangs up, which is also odd because Patsy is on the phone with the only people that can help her, and she disconnects from them. And this implies she gives up or gave up on her only hope for assistance. Think about that. Patsy's daughter was not her priority, apparently. And what does that mean? Now, typically, from a statement analysis perspective, a 911 caller has an emergency and needs assistance immediately. And that suggests that if you do not ask for immediate assistance, you're either involved, you know what happened, or you are the guilty party. As law enforcement arrived, they were minimally cooperative with law enforcement and investigators. However, they did agree to a nationwide televised interview with Brian Cabell of CNN 5 days later, 5 days after their daughter's death, on January 1st, 1997. Cabell's first question was, according to the transcript, why did you decide you wanted to talk now? John Ramsey's answer was this: well, we have been pretty isolated, totally isolated, for the last 5 days, but we've sensed from our friends that this tragedy has touched not just ourselves and our friends, but many people. And we know that there's many people that are praying for us, that are grieving with us, and we want to thank them, to let them know that we are healing. It's only 5 days, but we're healing already. And that we know in our hearts that JonBenet is safe and with God, and that the grieving that we all have to do is for ourselves and for our loss. But we want to thank those people that care about us. Those people, strangers. We talk about that, what is important to us first. Again, a filler word like well buys time to think about what you want to say. And that also suggests potential for rehearsal. John used the word tragedy. That's a really interesting word. His daughter was found in the basement, strangled to death. According to the coroner, on December 27th, she was struck with a blunt object and had a skull fracture 8.5 inches long in the shape of a mech light. So she got hit with a heavy object and then strangled, which is willful and deliberate. A tragedy has the sense of accident. When you are in a car accident, it's tragic. When you break your leg in that car accident, it's tragic. And tragedy truly implies accidental, unintentional. John Ramsey was downplaying a willful and deliberate murder. The use of a garrote is willful and deliberate, but he calls the murder a tragedy. He also said that they were totally isolated. If you're totally isolated, how can you sense from friends and strangers that they are grieving with you? That doesn't make sense. You were not totally isolated. And apparently, in his first question, his priority is to thank people for praying for them. You see a similarity here between the non-urgency in the S.B.T.C 911 call and the first answer to the question, why do you want to talk today? There are similarities. You see, S.B.T.C's priority was the address. It's a kidnapping, non-specific. It's a note, not a ransom note as far as that. And finally, she mentions that her daughter is gone. John's priority is, we were isolated. It's a tragedy. And I want to thank strangers. You see, both parents are in line with a pattern that established itself. JonBenet is apparently not the priority, not the number one priority. And as it turns out, as we will see in the following episodes that I'm planning to make, finding the killer was also not a priority. So what would you expect from Patsy? Patsy, the 911 call, first thing she would have yelled out, "My daughter has been kidnapped, help us please." Whereas John in the CNN interview, first thing why do you want to talk today? I would have looked straight into the camera and said, "I'm going to move heaven and earth to find you. If you know anything, contact the Boulder Police Department hotline. Here is the number. Please help us find who did this." None of that. I like to thank strangers. It's odd. It defies all logic. And in this sentence, and we know that there's many people that are praying for us, the Ramseys basically made it about themselves. I want your support. I don't need to know who killed JonBenet, as we will find out later in his word selection. We want you to know we appreciate you grieving with us. So let's have a brief look at the note. And in the following episodes, coming up in the coming weeks, I will go into detail. The ransom note is, of course, the most crucial hard evidence that we have. And it basically reveals who wrote the note, why the note was written, and what the content of the ransom note was all about. And interestingly, the most sought after acronym, S.B.T.C, is, in my opinion, the logical conclusion of the message that the ransom note was all about. So who wrote the ransom note? Well, we will find out in coming episodes that handwriting comparison analysis shows us who wrote the note. Why was it written? Statement analysis reveals that there are 3 parts to the note. An initial demanding part. The midsection is about hedging. And the latter part, especially the last paragraph, is pleading. And I will go into detail about that at a later stage. So the ransom note is highly deceptive and has also hints and points at alibi building. This will be a very interesting perspective. It is also a highly suspicious note in the sense that one person wrote the note, but more than one person actually authored the content of the note. So more than one person was involved in writing the note from a content perspective. The ransom note was about the balance of power between the 2 main players in the home. And of course, that is John and Patsy. There is a balance of power between Patsy and John. And the note reveals that one was coercing the other. And both knew something about each other that was so significant that they wrote the note with all the consequences attached to that. S.B.T.C is the logical conclusion, and I will go into detail about how I arrived at what it means and why it means what it means. And that is in the upcoming episodes. There is a hidden message in the note. It's natural conclusion. And note again that there is no period behind the C, suggesting it was not an automated acronym. You see, S.B.T.C without the period was apparently fabricated and not used before. Otherwise, the period would have been automated and automatically placed there habitually. Now, another interesting thing is the use of the periods itself. After all, most people that use acronyms don't use periods at all. So the ransom note, who wrote it, why, and what was it about? Well, if we look at the very first paragraph, we can see that the handwriting is extremely shaky, distorted. And from that perspective, the writer was either really anxious or wrote with the non-dominant hand, because at line 5960, closer to the end of the note, it became more fluid. It is very well possible that this writing was with the non-dominant hand. As we will discover in the near future, the ransom note was written inside the home on a notepad found in the home with a Sharpie belonging in the home. It's not just odd that the ransom note is 2.5 pages long, but it was also written in the home, and lo and behold, as I will show later, it was also written after JonBenet's demise. The note will show, the author will show that the author knew the child was dead already and still wrote the note. Typically, kidnappers bring a very short ransom note that goes something like, "We have your daughter, have $1 million ready, I'll contact you at 10 in the morning." And that's it. This 2.5 page ransom note is not just bizarre and rambling, it is highly illogical. On top of that, somebody that would kidnap for money, for ransom, would never leave their leverage behind, the body of the child, whether killed accidentally or not. It doesn't make sense to ask for money for ransom for the child to be found in the home so you know you don't have to pay. That is basically absurd. I said before that the ransom note is bizarre and rambling. Now think about the situation. I just told you that the ransom note was written in the home after the child's demise. The child was dead already. And then the author writes, I advise you to be arrested. Think about it. The kidnapper, the quote-unquote kidnapper, calmly sits down to write a 2.5-page ransom note, knowing the child is dead and the parents are sleeping upstairs. And then writes, I advise you to be arrested while they are sleeping. Of course, you can advise anything you want to, but which kidnapper even cares about you being arrested? They only want the money. And a kidnapper would also realize that tensions would be so high, anxiety levels would be so high for the parents, they would never listen to your advice in the first place. It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. And a line like that, and there's quite a few more of these lines, strongly suggest that the author did not experience the kidnapping scenario itself. This is not somebody writing from experiential memory. This is somebody fabricating a note, a ransom note, imagining what a kidnapper would do, but is so inept because the author is not the criminal, him or herself. The simplest conclusion is there is no intruder. There is no foreign faction. So in the next episode, in about a week or 2 weeks, I will do an analysis of the ransom note. I will show you who wrote the note and why the evidence point in who wrote the note in a very strong and consistent manner. I will show you why the note was written, what happened that night, and what the most sought after acronym S.B.T.C stands for. And having said that, follow me, hit the subscribe button so you get updates on the analysis of the note, the circumstances, and ultimately an update on my book, upcoming book, JonBenet, the final chapter, which will be way more detailed than the short presentations that I place here on YouTube. Good luck to you, and I hope you subscribe. Follow me on YouTube.